Hello and welcome in, everybody. We got the One Piece extra spoilers here with us today for chapter 1149. If you have not read these spoilers for yourself though yet, I will be typing it out in the pinned comment as well as linking to the source as to where I got them. So, with that being said, my name is Sai, and let's just get right into it. So, the first bullet point tells us that we get nothing, nada, from Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Loki's group today, which makes sense. I feel like we won't see them until things get really hairy, which by the end of the chapter, things do get hairy, so we'll get to that here in a second. But yes, we go back to where we left off last chapter, and we have the Sommers versus Gaban fight. According to the extra spoilers, we don't really see too much of Sommers putting up a fight. Gaban just goes in and cuts this man across the chest with an attack called Futen Oraku, which translates to two different things. First up, it means infallible, which is a cool attack name, but also it means heavenly music axe. Great name. I feel like we will, as time goes on, this is my, hypothesis, I think we will get more, quote, musical attacks going forward, especially given how prominent music is in One Piece with Luffy's Gear 5th and etc. I feel like we will get more music things later down the road. We still don't know how Gaban is hurting Sommers according to these spoilers, right? He's simply cutting him in half and Sommers cannot regenerate, but that doesn't mean that Sommers is dead though. Despite having his hand chopped off, despite being cut in half and incapacitated on the ground, he is still alive and kicking, which does make me ask the big old question, but how do we actually kill these guys? It's great that Gaban can put him down, but Sommers isn't out by any means. The minute he puts himself back together, he will just fight us again. He quite literally is a zombie. So, now that Gaban has defeated Sommers, he goes over to save his son Colin, and that is when we get a flashback of Colin's birth, which, is never a good sign, by the way. You could tell right away that Oda is setting up something nasty, and that is when we see that Gunko goes in and starts to stab Colin's neck before Gaban even arrives. Gaban thinks about beating Gunko, but using his future sight observation haki, he realizes that he would not get to Gunko before she would be able to kill him. So that is when he drops the axes and he says that he surrenders. And Gunko does not hesitate, but right after he drops his axes and surrenders, she stabs him 3 times with her arrows. And then the last thing we see from Gaban is him falling off of the branch. And we just see him saying sorry to not just Colin, but to all of Elbaf. And according to the spoilers, they say that Gaban's expression is heartbreaking here, which makes sense, right? Like, Gaban is that guy. If he was fighting Gunko in a locked room, I would put my money on Gaban. But because they have his kid hostage, because they have multiple kids hostage, he can't do anything, man. He really can't. So, that is when we see Colin, again, crying out for his dad, screaming father, and we get something a little bit unexpected. But Gunko suddenly remembers something from her past, and we see an adult woman crying and screaming out father as well. We don't know if this is Gunko or not. According to the leakers, they have hair similar to Gunko, but we don't see their face, so it's kind of ambiguous. Could be Gunko, could be Gunko's mother. Either way, sad backstories incoming. And Gunko comes back to the present and says, wait, what is this memory? And that is when Gunko gets another freaking flashback, but this time it is of Brook. That is right, we got a human Brook flashback from Gunko's perspective, and he's holding her hand in some kind of musical bar, musical area, and he says, yo ho ho, becoming a pirate is my dream. And then that is when we cut over to Brook, and he's putting the pieces together, brother. He says, that woman, how similar they are. And then we see Gunko running over to Brook too, and she says, wait, it was Brook, wasn't it? And then Imu tears away the reunion by taking over Gunko's body. So before we get into the Imu discussion, we gotta talk about Brook and Gunko, man. I love that Oda is giving us more Brook backstory. I loved what we got back in Thriller Bark with the Rumbar Pirates, but we always knew there was a life before that too. So I'm glad that Oda's finally touching on it a little bit. As far as his relationship with Gunko, I'm not too sure where we're going with it yet. It looks like Brook could just be a guy that Gunko met in their hometown village, and then Brook maybe helped her grieve the loss of her father. I think that is like the easy shoe-in. I've seen people saying that maybe Brook is the father, which I think is kind of crazy, but it's open. People are also saying that maybe she is the daughter of Yorkie, since we don't know the hair color, and since Yorkie did become a pirate, and that would explain why Brook said he wanted to be a pirate as well. I think there's a lot of interesting ways to fit Gunko into all of this, but I'm kind of just wondering, how did Gunko become a holy knight? Right? Like, it doesn't make any sense yet. Like, was she recruited kind of like Loki was going to be recruited? Maybe, but Loki was at least royalty. Maybe Gunko was royalty. Maybe that's it, right? Maybe Gunko was the princess of Brook's kingdom, but I'm not too sure if that would fit in quite yet, right? Why would she be screaming father if they were royalty? Like, who would steal the king or who would kill the king? I feel like there's a lot of pieces still missing here. And I think that is key right there. There are a lot of missing pieces, just like Gunko's memory. Gunko had no idea that these memories even existed. It was only when she saw Brook and saw Colin that everything started coming back together. So how did that happen? Did Imu wipe her memories? Or did she like fall and hit her head on a rock and that's why she doesn't remember anything? I think there's a lot of really good discussions that can come out of this, and I am curious to see what you guys think about this. Why does Gunko have no memories? How is Imu able to take control of her? And why was she recruited into the God Knights in the first place? Like, there's so many things here that just do not make sense yet, but I'm excited. If you were to tell me that we were going to get God Knight backstories here in Elbaf, I wouldn't believe you. But here we are, and I'm all for it, brother. I am all for it. What I think is fun about this, though, is that we kind of got hints of this beforehand, because we knew that Gunko wasn't a saint. We knew that her last name was being hidden, so there are already a lot of weird things about her. And then, of course, the popular theory that Gunko was possessed by Imu or controlled by Imu, or maybe even is Imu. Like, that always existed too. I was never on that camp, but that always existed. And here we have it. The culmination of all that is that Gunko is indeed that girl. So now, let's move on to Imu's appearance here in Elbaf. So before he even takes over Gunko's body, he appears in her head. And he talks to all the God Knights using his telepathy ability. The same ability we saw the Gorosei use back in Egghead. But he's like, hey guys, why are you taking so much time? The Holy Land is engulfed in flames right now. We need military power. And to help them move things along, to help the God Knights here in Elbaf speed up their plan, he takes control over Gunko. We see that Gunko now has the Imu eyes and is emitting black lightning. What? That, brother, is absolutely insane, and I'm all here for it. The God Knights, man, I love those boys. The God Knights are so freaking cool. I liked them as villains, but ever since Shamrock left, it felt weird. They didn't have a leader. But here we go. Imu has arrived and he is controlling Gunko. Now I'm just kind of curious, what powers are we going to see from Imu? Will Imu be able to use his powers through Gunko's body, or will he only be limited to Gunko's arrow no Mi? That's kind of what I'm curious about right now, and I do want to pass the question off to you guys. Do you think Imu will be able to take over fully and use his crazy transformation we saw back at the Reverie, or no, do you think this is going to be a nerfed version of Imu? Because I could see both being pretty plausible. But now that Imu is here, I feel like the outcome of Elbaf, in my eyes at least, has shifted in a direction. At first I was like, okay, 3 God Knights, sure, they regenerate. I want them to win, but I just couldn't imagine them beating the Monster Trio and Loki. But now that we have one of the final villains here on this island, things have changed. Do we actually get beaten by Imu? Or will we have to find a way to just stop this connection outright? Maybe because we can't beat Imu right now, which is an assumption, we haven't seen him fight yet, we instead have to sever that connection. Because that could be possible, right? We saw Joy Boy potentially sever the Gorosei's connection to Egghead by using a crazy Conqueror's Haki blast. So maybe that's what we have to do here. We just emit insane Conqueror's Haki, and then we send Imu back to his real body? I don't know. And then now that Imu is here, I feel like Sommers and Killingham are going to lock in. You know, Sommers, last we saw, he was left in pieces by Scopper Gaban. But now that his boss is here, will he lock in? You know, if he were to run it back with Scopper, would he try a little bit harder and perform better? I wonder. Also, now that Imu is here, you know, that's like a repeated phrase now. But now that Imu is here, will these guys also get buffed? Because back in Egghead Island, when Imu killed Saint Saturn, it really did look like he took away his soul and life force, his powers even. So since he's able to do that, is he able to buff his allies too? Like, imagine Sommers and Killingham, they're not strong enough, they're losing their battles. Is Imu able to buff them up? That is kind of what I'm wondering right now, because that would be really sick, man. You know, give them extra powers, give them extra transformations. I want to see what Imu is all about. And from the sound of it, man, he wants to show off here, because we end the chapter with Imu saying, "I will demonstrate what it means to be ruled by God." So, yeah, it sounds like he's not going to hold back. He wants them to wrap up their mission and get back to the Holy Land ASAP. Crazy stuff, brother. Crazy stuff. So, as far as the Holy Land goes, it is engulfed in flames. And according to the spoilers, we don't see who is causing this. So, Oda's leaving a lot to the imagination. But I think there's some pretty obvious candidates that everybody's talking about. The main one is Dragon, right? Dragon is like the one character in the series who has openly antagonized the WG. And not to mention, he said that he was waiting for the God Knights to make their move before he acted. Well, guess what? The God Knights moved and something happened. So I'm assuming, I want to be liberal here, but I'm assuming it is Dragon attacking the Holy Land right now. But of course, there are other good options out there. I've seen a lot of people talking about Blackbeard, and he makes sense as well, right? He was witnessing the whole Rev versus WG conflict on the side. So if Blackbeard also put his foot in the ring here, I would not be shocked, right? It could be multiple factions all running rampant at the same freaking time. One thing that's weighing on my mind right now is how are the other Holy Knights faring, and where are they, right? Because right here on Elbaf, we got 3 Holy Knights. You know, we got Gunko, Sommers, and Killingham, but they're not the only Holy Knights, right? There should be 6 other ones, right? We still have Garling, we have Shamrock, and a bunch of ones that we haven't met yet. Are they currently fighting in the Holy Land too, or are they all also off on their own missions, kind of like these 3 here in Elbaf? Because, you know, Imu wanting military power now, that makes sense, but will Sommers, Killingham, and Gunko really move the needle in a war? Like, why not get the others? You know, Shamrock should be there, right? They summoned Shamrock back almost immediately, so he should be there too. Is Shamrock not enough to deal with the current threat up at Marie's Raw? I mean, not just Shamrock, but they got the Gorosei there too. So whoever they're fighting, they got a lot of people. You know, they got a lot of heavy hitters, man. And I'm excited to see what the hell's going on here. Oda is speeding things up, and I was not expecting this, you know. I was not expecting this at all. And then of course the last thing we gotta talk about, we talked about this yesterday, but Imu saying, "Why are you taking so much time?" Brother, the God Knights have been here for maybe 10ish chapters, you know. Killingham, Sommers, and Gunko, maybe even less than that. So him dropping that line does back up the whole time dilation theory here on Elbaf, where time moves faster or slower or vice versa. So yeah, I think there's something going on with that. But, you know, we need more hints before we can really draw that conclusion. You know, maybe Imu is just really annoyed that he needs them ASAP. And he's like, hey, guys, speed things up, man. What are you doing? Why are you playing games? Because that is what they're doing, right? When Shamrock was leaving, he said, hey, let's play a game with our powers. Where in reality, they could have just easily attacked with force instead. So maybe that's why Imu's so annoyed. But we will see, brother. We will see. As far as Luffy and the gang not being shown in this chapter, I talked about that earlier, but I do think they will finally come back into play pretty soon. Now that a big and major villain is on this island, I think it's time to call in the boys. You know, Scopper Gaban is falling off. He's going to go into the underworld. He's going to land in front of Luffy, and then they're going to rush up ASAP. I can already see it in my head, man. I can already see it. So I do just want to pass the question on to you guys. How do you feel about all of this? Do you think Imu will actually dominate here in Elbaf? Or no, do you still think the boys will be able to pack up Imu Gunko? Which, you gotta remember, Imu is in Gunko's body, so maybe this is a nerf to some extent. I'm really torn on it, because on one hand, if it was just the God Knights here, you know, Gunko, Sommers, and killing him, I feel like the boys could win. But because Imu is playing as them, I kind of want to put my money on him. Just because he's the final villain. I don't know, man. You know, we can't exactly meme on the final guy like this. Like a Void Century villain, the ruler of the world. If we beat him here, or at least even a nerfed version, that'd be kind of fascinating, man. But yeah, I'll catch y'all later. Make sure to comment your theories and thoughts down below, because we will be going through that comment section in the next couple of days. So make sure to drop your opinions down there. And with that being said, I'll catch you guys later. Signing out.